Ulit, ulit.
I shall now call on and invite Mr. David Balwin, Director of Humanities and Social Sciences Research Hub, Private Limited, to deliver the special address. Let's welcome Mr. D. Good morning, Chairperson and distinguished scholars and friends. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to this international conference on humanities and social sciences with a theme beyond borders interdisciplinary approach to global issues. I'm Devi Arun, founder and director of the Humanities and Social Sciences Research Hub and the main organizer of this conference. To begin with, I'd like to enlighten you all with the nature and events of our company. We operated under the Ministry of Corporate Affairs Department of India, so Humanities functions as a dedicated event organizer and research facilitator in the field of humanities and social sciences. Since its inception, the hub has actively engaged in organizing academic events, international conferences, webinars, and research workshops in collaboration with national and international institutions. Under this hub, apart from the parent organization, we have two internal platforms: the Center for Humanities and Social Sciences Research, CHSSR, and Integrated Perspectives, a model of interdisciplinary research which is currently under development. If SSR is currently funding one researcher under CHSSR research grant to advance independent studies in the humanities and social sciences related to Mizoram. And I'd like to introduce the HSSR members present today, Dr. Juliet, our board members, and the organizing secretary of the conference. And we have two upcoming events, conferences with Public Affairs Center, Bangalore, and Center for International Community Research and Current Therapy. And I'd like to invite each and every one of us present today, online and offline, to unfortunately can't join us today to require research conference. This conference was and the challenges of our age, such as climate change, migration, conflicts, and other issues cannot be solved within a single discipline. Go beyond boundaries to recognize that literature, sociology, social sciences, and other disciplines, humanities, and social are not isolated terrains, but they are interconnected fields. When we weave them together, we generate insights that can respond to the complexities of our global realities. And the phrase beyond boundaries is not just an immediate choice, it is a call to action. In today's interconnected world, global issues seldom respect national, cultural, or disciplinary borders. Climate change, forced migration, economic inequality, political unrest, all these things transcend geographical divisions and intellectual differences. Take, for example, the question of climate change. By scientists measure rising sea levels, it is the anthropologists and sociologists who study how communities adapt. Historians trace environmental change over centuries, and the philosophers ask us to confront the ethical dimensions of human responsibilities. It is within these perspectives that define the true power of interdisciplinary. By placing the humanities and social sciences into this dialogue, we do not merely and reflective side by side, we create a collaboration, a partnership that helps us see the world in its complexity. And the theme of our conference, Beyond Boundaries, approaches and look outward and cross disciplines to bridge gaps and raise multiple voices through the interconnected understanding and we tackle the layered reality of our time. This conference is not simply a gathering of papers and presentations. It is an invitation to engage in this kind of dialogue. We have among us senior academics whose research has shaped the contours of their fields, early career scholars, and brilliant minds who bring fresh insights and graduate students who represent the future of our disciplines. The interaction between these voices is what makes such a conference dynamic and meaningful. And I'd like to take a few moments to outline the procedure of this kind of conference, particularly abstract writing. So abstract submission is the gateway to this conference and many other events and publication as well. So an effective abstract is usually 150 to 300 words, and it usually contains four components. The first is the background, what is the issue of or the problem you are addressing, and also the aim of the or the objective of your paper, and also perhaps to mention the methodology which approach you are using for studying that issue. And we have to mention the key findings and the capabilities. But all these components should not be written under a subtype or separate paragraph. Abstract should be written in a single paragraph. And new words are legally required. And so, once abstracts are submitted, they undergo a review process by the organizing committee, and the reviewers assess the abstract from the relevant originality, clarity, alignment to the conference, in the process of or procedure of the abstract. And um, authors of accepted abstracts are invited to complete with the registrations and prepare their presentations for the conference sessions. And for this conference, we have um, new publication options, which is the content proceeding and the hearing with journals. The detailed instructions is already included in the official conference but app book. And so under 12 into this submission is no longer accepted. Beyond studios, let us not forget the state of why we learn here. This gathering is not only about academic rigor, but also building a community of dialogue. In a world often divided by politics and identity, and humanities and social sciences remind us of our shared human concerns and values. By coming together, listening to one another, and engaging peacefully yet respectfully, we demonstrate the very essence of our team going beyond boundaries. I hope this conference will inspire collaboration with class far beyond this day, and that each of you will leave not only with new knowledge, but also with new friendships and collaboration. And we begin this event, let us remember that conferences are not endpoints, they are beginnings. And let us approach this conference with curiosity, humility, and openness. I thank each of you. I thank each of you for being here, for your contributions, and for your patience. I wish you all a very fruitful and enriching and memorable conference. And I'd like to take this moment to present this citation to Humanities College to express our heartfelt gratitude. So I'd like to invite the principal and Dr. Julian from the Humanities to present the citation. I just read it out. Certificate of Appreciation. This certificate is proudly presented to Humanities College H1 for working with us and jointly organizing the one-day international conference on beyond boundaries interdisciplinary approach to global issues successfully on the 24th of September 2025 at Humanities College and Zolpizarre. Thank you, Brian. I think we're ready with Inaugural. It's again, may I now invite Dr. Ryan First Roy from the University of Southern Denmark to kindly deliver the keynote address.
Don't need to repeat that. Good morning, esteemed officers, dignitaries, and fellow scholars. I welcome you all to this literary extravaganza. I'm in the government from College and said HSSRA for inviting me to this talk. The talk is the roots of transcendence, Jim Morrison's poetry work from pitch to existential. Just before opening up its presentation, I would just like to ask the students who is going to anybody to rock and roll and poetry, slam poetry. Anyway, great. Well, so let's begin this. Jim Morrison was the iconic frontman of the psychedelic rock band The Doors. Morrison kind of recorded 6 studio albums with The Doors. All of them were smashing in terms of commercially and critically acclaimed as well. Morrison lyrics combined with wild lyricism and mesmerizing beat of rock kind of created several classic poems, which he performed when the band was playing live. And Morrison was recently regarded as the third most influential rock star, just after Dylan Lennon by rock and roll magazines, The Rolling Stones. Now, the legacy of Jim Morrison as a rock star is unquestionable. But when it comes down to his poetry, most people send it to rap poetry or graphics of a rap and rock star. And that's where this particular research comes in and difference the poetic genius of Jim Morrison, making it to the beat poetic tradition of Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, and Michel Machiavelli. So this is basically the technical contents, or rather what the audience should expect from this particular research. Together, we'll try to find out how this Jim Morrison and his poetry connected to American tradition, in which field of American literature can we place Morrison, how is beat poetics connected to Morrison's poetry. Now, this is just going to be a movie on the 1960s. So, like, relax, fasten your seatbelts, and enjoy the ride. The methodology that this particular research uses is descriptive, as we are working on a date poet. So several research tools like critical analysis and comparative investigation are used in order to dissect the poetic goal and the chaotic philosophy of Jim Morrison's poetry. This is like basically the literature review section. We have some fabulous biographies of Morrison in the left-hand side. Like my fire, break on through, no one here gets out alive. Jim Morrison, life, death, and legend. But hey, these are all great biographies. They do not critically analyze also known as the lost writings of Jim Morrison. The second anthology is called The American Night. The third was The Lords and the New Creatures, and the fourth one, the law and the complete works of Jim Morrison, which includes all the unpublished poems still now. Rather than Jim Morrison, I definitely want to mention this particular book by Wallace Pauly. Wallace Pauly was basically a French literature professor from Duke University who translated the poems of Arthur Rimbaud from French to English language. Now, Jim Morrison back in that day, like, wrote a letter thanking Wallace Pauly for this particular translation because he was hugely inspired from this particular French symbolism. And this particular letter was still today intact in Duke University Press archives. Moving on, so there are 5 periods of American literature: colonial, early national period, the Romantic period, realism and naturalism, the modernist period, and the contemporary period. Now the question arises: in which period of American literature can we place Morrison? The answer is we cannot place Morrison in any other period. However, there is another period of American literature that remained in shadows for long, that is Greek generation period. Now, this particular period was formed back in 1950s New York City by Allen Ginsberg, Lawrence Bernini, and Jack Kerouac. Well, one of the most beautiful definitions regarding what is beat is given by Allen Ginsberg himself, who once said that it's not a beat poetry, nor a beat novel, nor a beat painting. Beat is basically an attitude towards the world. Well, this in the next slide, we'll try to understand the concept of beat in a more descriptive fashion. Well, this particular period of American literature had a very short lifespan in compared to the other periods of American literature, but it had a profound impact on American society, film, music, literature, and culture. Now, I've seen a tendency often among general audience and scholars alike that they confuse the term beat with beatniks. Beatniks is basically a derogatory term which is associated with generally European witch culture, but beats kind of celebrated an orthodox way of life, and their association with Afro-American intellectuals and their negative connotation. They were more active in the lost generation of poets. So one of the greatest representatives of lost generation of poet was Ernest Hemingway himself, ladies and gentlemen. Most of the beats were disillusioned with capitalistic influence of American government, and they expressed this moral degradation in social, political, and economic sphere in their writings. Most of them rejected societal norms, celebrated individuality. They kind of were more into Eastern philosophy than alternative spiritualities. They loved spontaneity in their writing and used several free-flowing creativity and philosophic tendencies, not only in their life, but also in their art. So they kind of opposed materialism, consumerism, and authoritative structures of the government. And when it came to literary innovation, several of them experimented with stream of consciousness technique and kind of used several poetic raw candy phrases in their writings. Some of the beats use substances to expand consciousness and explore altered states. And by no means this particular research supports substance abuse. This is only to understand the concept of the beats. Most of them are rooted in urban countercultures, particularly in cities like San Francisco and New York. And what I mean by counterculture, I have a slide main on that. I'll come to that like in some other slide. Well, most of them are also obsessed with travel. They kind of celebrated nomadic lifestyle and romanticized hero narratives in their work. And one of the greatest tweets, Jack Kerouac once said that the beats are a vision that was wrapped, literally, ugly, in a precious new day. Now, these are the big influences of Jim Morrison in a nutshell. First, Jack Kerouac, his novel On the Road impacted Morrison hugely. Then we have Allen Ginsberg. Like there is written documentation that Jim Morrison and Allen Ginsberg met several times in their lifetime for literary sessions, scheduled for training sessions, and of course, Richard Matt Lever, the travel poet from the 1960s, was responsible for Jim Morrison's third anthology of Lost and the New Creatures. Well, these are some of the favorite Jack Kerouac books that Jim Morrison really liked. Well, we have on the road to Big Sur, subterranean, Dr. Sat. The keyboard is for the rim answer. One said that if Jack Taylor had been written on this particular novel on the road, Jim Morrison and the Doors would never have been existed, or they wouldn't have been infused with the sense of search, that is the sense of freeing themselves. So these are the ways in which my students try to connect Kerouac with Jim Morrison, firstly on the visceral stream of consciousness. Morrison's poetry kind of mirrored Kerouac's spiritual and spontaneous time. Then on the visceral spiritual exploration, Morrison, like Kerouac, who have several mystical and transcendental elements in his work. Both of them uses road imagery. Morrison's work kind of reflected Kerouac's fascination with the open road, more kind of like the motorcycle diaries that Shea Weaver once wrote. Well, they are more into urban landscapes. Both ways kind of captured the raw energy of urban landscape and countercultural life. And of course, existential inquiry, like Kerouac, Morrison had questions with identity and existential crisis that surrounds human life. Both the poets were rebel, the kind of rebel that is conformity of society, and infused their writings with deep freedoms. Of course, they had experience on freedom, both celebrated personal and freedom as central themes. Now, the protagonist on the road, that is Deep Moretti, kind of impacted Morrison hugely. And in the left side top corner, we have the picture of Deep Moretti, how he looked in the movies. Well, Jack Taylor on the road said, and I quote, the only people for me are the mad ones, the ones who are mad to talk, mad to say, deserves of everything at the same time, the ones who never yawn, or say a publicly say, but gone, like fabulous yellow candles exploding like spiders upon the stars. And in the middle, you see the blue center light pop, and everyone goes on. Jim Morrison idolized Kerouac so much that he wrote in the prologue of his poems, and I quote, I see myself as a huge fire top at a shooting star. Everyone stops, points up and gasps, oh, look at that, and whoosh, I'm gone. They'll never see it again, and they'll never be able to follow me anymore. Unquote. From when Jim Morrison was writing all this, he was definitely channeling the spirit of his group, that is Jack Kerouac. Morrison is again apparently appealed by the idea of chaos as being already that he wrote in a bit of his poems, and I quote, I'm interested in anything about revolt, disorder, and chaos, especially activity that seems to have social reformation. Unquote. Well, there is an interesting fact I would like to share with the audience is that this particular character, Deep Moretti, was inspired by another countercultural icon whose name was Negan Cassidy, and whose picture you can see here in the right hand side bottom corner. And if you check out Jim Morrison's early photos, you'll see that he had a significant resemblance not only with Jim Moretti, but also with Negan Cassidy in terms of style, as well as his core way of thinking, his core beliefs. Well, now most of the beats were kind of inspired by one literary theory, which is existentialism. I'm sure lit grads in here, they have studied this as part of their curriculum. So this is basically a philosophical movement from champions individual freedom and in an abstract world. And however, this particular definition can be broken down in four subparameters. First, existence specific sense, which means that people define themselves through their own choices and action and not by the predetermined self of society, which means that destiny is not character, but rather it is character that is destiny. So life is inherently uncertain and absurd, but the meaning must be treated by the individuals. Champions authentic living, which requires freedom as well as responsibility. And by taking responsibility, he kind of suggests being a good Samaritan. Apart from that, anxiety and alienation will always be a part of life. Well, but do not get stressed by that. It will also open to the path to self-realization. And in the next slide, I have basically a video of this Humanities track by the Doors. It's called Car is by My Window. Now, this particular track brings out Jim Morrison's existential mood, like as if the self is drifting in an indifferent world. This particular lyrics by Morrison kind of suggests that it's like the meaning of life has been created, not given, out of confronting isolation of existence. And in the video, we'll see how a loner in a desert tries to hitchhike, and none of the cars stops by. So he tries to make meaning in the midst of this pandemonium. Now let's watch this. I hope YouTube holds up. Pardon me for the ad.
Like this song, check out the shopping playlist along with everything that
I'll cut this a bit short due to time limitation, so we'll see it from here. Let me see. Yeah. Yeah, my baby. Oh. That's that trying to make sense in this madness. Well, this kind of philosophy has not only impacted the writing style of the poets of the 1960s, but kind of impacted the fashion sense. I call the next slide the on the road syndrome. Well, William Pierce Burroughs once said that this particular novel on the road sold a trillion of Levi's. Definitely, I'm speaking of Levi's brand. I would later like to know from the students how many of them are fans of this particular brand. Well, this iconic denim brand is just one of the companies that kind of benefited from the disaffected look popularized by the big generation. And in the right hand side, I have how a damaged jeans looks like. Until today, my professors and teachers rebuke me a lot for wearing this kind of stuff in public. So, but there's a philosophy behind all this. Well, it is basically a defiance against consumerism, mirroring the beat anti-materialist values, and it also rebels against polished appearances. And when I mean polished appearances, I mean that you do not need to have eight-pack abs to look attractive or follow a fashion star from Bollywood to be fashionable. You need to create your own style, do it yourself. And in that way, it kind of challenges the very authoritarian standard of beauty set by the rules of society. Most importantly, it teaches its users to embrace individuality, again, which means that each and every individual is kind of beautiful and attractive in his or her very own way, which is again a very core tenet of big generation's countercultural philosophy. And in the next line, I have a poem that is recited by Jim Morrison himself. Well, this is basically known as the Vision of America, which brings out the fractured condition of the 1960s America, as well as it kind of resonates the same feeling that T.S. Eliot by T.S. Eliot wrote the West had. So this is a revolt against the unlawfully confiscation of lands by greedy American hoteliers from India Americans. Let's hear this. Real voice was still. That's that. We'll stop here. Well, the next slide is on the connection of Jim Morrison with Allen Ginsberg. Well, Allen Ginsberg, in How the Other Poems wrote, and I quote Ginsberg, I have seen the best mind of my generation destroyed by madness, starving history to naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn, looking for an angry fix, angel-headed hipsters, burning for the ancient heavenly connection with starry dynamo in the machinery of the night, unquote. Similarly, Jim Morrison writes, shape dreams from your hair, my pretty child, my sweet one, choose the day, choose the sign of your day. The day's divinity, the first thing you see, a vast radiant beach in a cool jewel moon, couples naked, raised down by its wayside, and we laugh like soft mad children, unquote. Now, if you critically studies both the two parallels, you'll see that both of these parallels are stuck with surrealism. They bring out the angst and alienation of the 1960s, and most importantly, the social sexual norm that was imposed on Jim Morrison's generation. And these are the ways in which this particular research tries to connect Ginsberg with Jim Morrison. Firstly, on the basis of raw honesty, Morrison's poetry kind of mirrors Ginsberg's confessional expression. An exploration of madness, both drugged into the human psyche and chaotic depths of the mind. Sexual liberation, Morrison, like Ginsberg, celebrates themes of mock freedom and sensuality. Urban despair, Ginsberg's influence is evident in Morrison's depiction of pretty decaying cityscapes. Spiritual quest, both poets explore mysticism and transcendence through vivid imagery. Anti-established mode, Morrison channels Ginsberg's critique of austerity and societal conformity. Surrealism, inspired by Ginsberg, Morrison incorporates dreamlike and surreal elements in his poetry. And rhythmic cadence, Ginsberg's jazz-influenced rhythm kind of resonated in Morrison's lyrical style. And then we have the connection of Mitchell McClure with Jim Morrison. As said before, this particular maestro was responsible for Jim Morrison's third anthology of poem that was Lost and the New Creators. And these are the ways in which I tried to connect the two methods. Firstly, on the basis of themes of rebellion and freedom. For McClure, the performance of poetry was just like an act of communion, a way of breaking down the barriers between individuals and reconnecting them to the animal within. Now, Morrison, in his turn, he often enter trance-like stages during his performances, using the stage as a space to invoke the mystical and the aesthetic. Then, on the basis of language and form, like Matthew was way more experimental than Jim Morrison when it came to the structure of his poetry. But however, Morrison's work exhibits similarity in surrealism and dreamlike quality with that of Mitchell McClure. And then visionary experience and sublime, a defining characteristic of McClure's poetry is his deep ecological and biological awareness, which focuses on primal animalistic aspects of human nature. Now, in poems such as the Ghost Tantra, McClure kind of emphasizes several raw energy of existence using words like growl and grunge. Now, this particular style, growl and grunge, was again celebrated by one of the greatest rockstars of the era of the 90s, that was Scott Cobain. And again, Morrison, on the other hand, embodies rebellion through his personal lyrics and often engaged with themes of freedom, death, and transgression. In poems like Break On Through and The End, Morrison kind of explored the notion of transcending limits. Definitely, this letter was translated into song, but Morrison at first conceived both these pieces as poems. That's why I just remarked them as like poems instead of songs. So these are the 16 roadies. They impacted Jim Morrison's poetry directly or indirectly, and all of them kind of celebrated the in-road narratives in their works. Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, Mitchell McClure, Neil Cassidy, William S. Burroughs, Lawrence Ferry. However, this particular poet, Lawrence Ferry, never met Jim Morrison in real life. He owned a very important bookstore known as City Light Bookstore back in 1950s New York City. And had you been a young adult growing up in the 1960s countercultural suburbs, you would definitely to visit this particular spot because this particular place had all the banned books by the American government. So Jim Morrison, growing up in a countercultural era, visited this particular bookshop several times during his youth. So moving on, now we have what is counterculture. If in one sentence I have to define what is counterculture, I'll say that everything that is anti-mainstream is counterculture. It is basically a response to political and cultural practices perceived as limiting and oppressive. And now there are several ways in which the countercultural ideologies can be reflected in Jim Morrison's poetry. Firstly, on the basis of rebellion against austerity and conformity, poets like Break On Through celebrated breaking boundaries, both societal and psychological. Then exploration of altered states of consciousness, poems such as Celebration of the Lizard and the End Because hallucinatory imagery is going to dream like a subconscious realms. Future of art and life is poetry often blurs the line between personal and the universal, merging mythological references to his lived experiences. And of course, eroticism and liberation of desire. Morrison's poetry explored several themes of eroticism that aligns with countercultural emphasis on sexual freedom and breaking taboos surrounding bodily expressions. And these are some of the iconic countercultural moments that I would like to share with the audience. First is basically the anti-war storm that 1960s American youth kind of protested against the Vietnam War. They came out with this particular poster which said that make love, not war. This kind of poster is still in vogue in the modern era as well. Then the LGBT movement of the 1960s, where the students revolted against like banning a gay person from entering a pub. The students came up with this particular poster which said that this is alcohol for straight people only, thus stripping the mainstream culture. And then again, the ever controversial Allen Ginsberg came out this time when American government kind of banned the intake of marijuana in the personal space of an individual. This particular poet believed that the personal space cannot be controlled by any government or state. So he came up with this particular poster which said that pot is a real ticket. And again, by no means this particular research supports substance abuse. So no matter in which stage of you're in, say no to drugs. And one of the greatest like advocate against drug abuse was Jim Morrison himself, who once said that if you live like Jim Morrison, you die like Jim Morrison. So statutory warning given, and this is basically how Jim Morrison's poetry impacted or reshaped American literary tradition, firstly on the basis of revitalization of beat and countercultural tradition. His work kind of resonated with the free-spirited countercultural ethos that was central to American literary innovation in the mid-20th century. By marching both poetry and drama, he kind of expanded the reach and influence of poetic expression. Most of his work kind of renews the exploration of existential and transcendental themes for the modern audience, which embedded them within a psychedelic and postmodern concept. And several of his ability in writing poetry delves into the influence of surrealism, mystique, and the occult, which showcases American literature's capacity for cultural synthesis. The Lost and the New Creatures bridges ancient storytelling tradition with contemporary themes of alienation and self-discovery, which kind of introduced both mythological and archetypal narratives in the 1960s poetry. And most importantly, the last one, critique of consumerist culture. Well, his poetry critiques materialism and commodification of art. He was against, social media. So he believed that the 1960s TV culture was eating away the intellect of the American youth. And he believed that it was making them a hard race. When hard race he meant when people who kind of follow a system without asking any question or blindly, and thus this kind of reflective of a broader literary trend in American literature. With that, I end this particular presentation. Thank you so much. I'm really sorry, like I keep so much time on my pages, so like any question you can mail me because I understand there are lots of presentations. So I'm really sorry, like it took so much time for me. I really apologize. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roy, for your insightful and thought-provoking keynotes. I have the opportunity to jot down some notes from your presentation. It was a very interesting speech on rock pop counterculture, literary analysis, and linguistic studies, offering fresh insight into poetic dimensions. And thank you for also enlightening us with things behind wearing the torn jeans. That was something new. And I believe that the speech will set a foundation for the discussions on the conference, especially on themes on literature. And when you mentioned the big groups, it just comes to my mind that as a romantic, the preface to the Lyrical Balance, which was the manifesto, yes, the manifesto for the romantic writers, in comparison with the big groups, this, as you have mentioned, Allen Ginsberg poem Howl, which is also serving as a manifesto for the big groups. And thank you for your speech, sir.
And following the keynote address, keynote address, to conclude the inaugural session, I now request Dr. Juliet Lermoy-Valde, Associate Professor and Coordinator, RQSC, Dr. London College, to deliver the vote of thanks. Please welcome Dr. Juliet. Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the technical issues that we had in the beginning. Those are things that come with development. Nothing is perfect, but we all want to be developed. So we want to use the most developed technology, but the cons of that is what we just experienced. I'll make this more thanks short because we're running out of time. And we thank you very much for to all the participants for attending the inaugural session and participating in this one-day international conference on humanities and social sciences, jointly organized by Zone Humanities and Social Sciences Research Hub, OPC Private Limited, and IQAC Government from Mana College, as well as around. Firstly, we know we're running out of time. So, but this is a must, for any program to show your gratitude to everybody. And so, firstly, I would like to thank God for all His blessings, and at the same time, pray for His intervention for the success of this conference. So, and I extend my gratitude to our principal for finding the time in spite of his busy schedule for his welcome speech. Sadly, he cannot be here with us the whole day because he has other engagements. So anyway, we're very thankful to him for finding the time. And Sir Doctor, name is quite difficult for me to pronounce. Bruce. Bruce. Yes. Thank you so much for the keynote address. That was, very unique and very interesting. I think we all like pop, rock music, and Mizram is a place where it's full of music, different types of music, and we're very musical people. And thank you for bringing the spice in our culture, in our environment. Thank you so much, and thank you for coming all the way to Mizoram to share your work with us. And that was very unique, very interesting. Thank you so much. I hope you have a good, further studies. I hope you continue to do that. And I expect, I hope you'll be successful in whatever you do, whatever you pursue. Thank you. And thank you, everybody. I hope you have a pleasant day today. So let's hope that we don't have any more problems. We might be having some social problems, but let's expect problems. But let's hope that it's not very major. And I hope that everybody will, understand that these are things that we cannot be solved immediately. So I beg all of you to bear with us for the problems that we might be facing, but let's be optimistic. So let's have a great day. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Juliet, for your words and acknowledging that everyone's contribution to making this conference possible. With that, we conclude the inaugural session of the ICHSS. I now invite all participants to proceed to the technical sessions. That is after the short tea break that we will be having right now. As part of the program schedule, I encourage presenters and participants to engage actively and make the most of the conference. Once again, thank you all for your presence, and I wish your conference any success. Thank you.